We will start in 3 minutes. Horacio, we can start. Okay, we will start. We have a present for you. Let me share the screen.
Hey. Now, thank you so much for joining us. We are starting with this pre-event of the 18 International Docomomo Conference and Student Workshop, which will be held in Santiago, Chile next year in December. we started with this idea of these pre-events every Thursday because we want to move the environment to have a little challenge to come to Chile for all of us. Thank you especially for starting with this meeting related to reconstructing modern interiors. I'm introducing Susanna Borax from KU Leuven Faculty of Architecture. She is also president of Docomomo Belgium and the chair of the Modern Interior Scientific Committee of Docomomo International. Also, we have as speaker Marta Peixoto. Marta is professor at the Universidade Federal de Rio Grande do Sul and former coordinator of the program of postgraduate in architecture. And also we have a member of Docomomo Brazil. And we have also Anita Puig, member of Docomomo Chile. She is PhD from the Catholic University here in Chile and professor in several universities in the country. Thank you so much for joining us again. I can leave now the voice to Susanna, I think, is first. Of course, encourage you to come to Chile next December. I hope this idea of having a meeting every week since today to next year, it would be interesting for all of the audience of Docomomo. Thank you so much. Go ahead.
So thank you very much, Horacio, and thank you very much also for the organization for this idea to start with these pre-events. And I think it was a good idea to do it on interiors. So I will just share my screen. Please tell me if it is okay. Can you see my full screen?
Yes.
Yes, okay. And it is moving. So I will have a talk about perhaps an unusual topic on stained glass windows in modern churches. So until the first gulf of secularization in the 1960s, the Roman Catholic Church dominated everyday life in Belgium. Today, this dominance is still manifest in an impressive heritage of church architecture. In the 20th century alone, 1970, so almost 1,000 new churches were built in the provinces of Flanders. So that means the northern part of the country, but without the Brussels capital. So we are talking about 1,000 new built churches, most of which were fitted with stained glass windows. So this in itself constitutes an impressive subset of modernist architecture. In the last 20 years, however, church attendance has shrunk dramatically. Church attendance, even once a month, is less than 1%, according to the latest statistics. This is in stark contrast with the historic dominance of the church on everyday life. This evolution, combined with other factors such as continuing maintenance and repair costs, which was in 2021 was 53 million euros, just taxpayers' money. So these costs creates an urgent need for reuse scenarios, even though the presence of the church building itself is still largely appreciated by the community. Besides the dramatic figures in church attendance, the lack of priests is perhaps an even bigger issue. After many years of denial by the leading figures of the Belgian Catholic Church, parishes are now being reorganized, communities clustered, and church buildings disaffected or deconsecrated, and actively looking for a new function. The big question remains, however, which function, and how to link it to the character of the church building from a responsible and sensitive heritage perspective. sorry. The cultural web of church building is complex and poses hard questions. From the point of view of the architecture, in a church building, there is a strong interrelation between the architectural shell, the interior furnishing, and the performance of the liturgy. Reuse as a durable conservation strategy is therefore problematic, as the original interior furnishing is per definition or almost always entirely incompatible with the new function. From the point of view of the liturgy, it is a living tradition within Catholicism and belongs to the cultural and historical background of the church building. By extension, an additional dimension is the collective memory of the assembly of believers and their families. In the case of almost all repurposing, an important part of the intangible dimension of the church building will be affected or only partially conserved. For example, in the case of a cultural or community center, the community aspect is maintained. Moreover, and this is important, intangible dimensions are very much intertwined with the tangible aspect of the church building. And as a consequence, material and immaterial aspects need to be approached in their interconnectedness and in an interdisciplinary manner. So in my talk today, I would like to focus on a particular medium, namely the church window, which is very much present in most Catholic church buildings, also the modern ones. In Belgium, even until the end of the 20th century, church buildings were only considered completed when church windows had been placed, usually as the final phase of the restoration or construction project, and often many years later. Now, responding to the acute problem of empty churches, the Flemish government, who finances their maintenance as long as they are in service, took action, and in 2015, the Flemish government set up the project office for church reuse. And this initiative provided the possibility to receive support for organizing a feasibility study for a partial or complete reuse of parish churches. It eventually resulted in a website with an inspiration library of best practice cases and research by design reports free to download. Though the project office maintains a high standard, the fate of stained glass windows did not receive particular attention. Before continuing, a word on the stained glass window. What is its relationship to the architecture and the interior? Without going into the technical aspects, essentially it is quite simple. Cut pieces of colored glass, painted or not, supported by metal cane strips, which are mostly lead cane strips. Applied in a single layer, stained glass windows clearly pose an insulation challenge. The post-war variants, which are in glass in concrete, does not perform much better in that sense. But this is a technical aspect which I leave aside today. So, the stained glass window. According to the traditional classification, it belongs to the applied or minor arts. But what does this mean? It is not furniture. In many cases, it is not only ornament, neither architecture, and certainly not fine art. And in most cases, it is very much part of the liturgical function. How can we deal with this ambiguous status? Well, maybe we should rephrase the question. What is the nature and the degree of interdependence between the window, the architecture, and the interior? The relationship between them is very tight and is moreover accompanied by the narrative of the institution of the church and the liturgical function. This last point, in my view, is quite fundamental, because we are talking here of the Catholic Church with its unmistakable symbols and figurations and narratives expressed in the windows, the Bible of the poor, as it was called in the Middle Ages, narratives which are nowadays, especially in Western Europe, largely considered outdated and associated with an obsolete belief system and lifestyle, ranging from a systematic denial of changes in society to the abuse of children. This negative emotional connotation to the heritage of the church is, of course, problematic in the context of reuse and adaptation to a profane program. What we are confronted with here is a dissociation of the historic coherence between site and program, and with it also a dissociation between the design and artistic coherence. But exactly at this point, more precisely in the design process, we have to be careful not to forget other aspects, especially potential positive emotional aspects. Such positive emotional aspects also have a strong historical or sociological dimension. This seems to be crucial in the examples that follow, marked by a strong desire to conserve the windows, regardless of the new function. So through these three cases in East Flanders, with stained glass and glass in concrete architectural glass made by the artist Staffpeil, I would like to open up a discussion on the shift in appreciation of and on the enduring positive emotional attachment to this craft, especially in relation to the sacred interior. More specifically, I will look at how an interior can be approached in an open and positive manner as a start to gain insight into its essence in order to define the conditions for an appropriate new function. For this, I am leaning on the following article, which was written by B. Plevits and Koenraad van Klempel, Emulatio and the Interior Approach of Adaptive Reuse, which was published in 2014. What the authors call the interior approach asks for a more poetic attitude, which uses the memory of the building, represented in and through its interior features, as a key to finding a new function. The nuances, terms, concepts, and notions developed by the authors I found to be quite useful for the analysis of these cases. So I will start now with my three examples with stained glass windows by Staffpeil. And my first example is the Christ the King Church in the town of St. Nicholas. The town was constructed in 1938, is built entirely in concrete, is a three-nave frugal Art Deco or modern church. And the church was listed in 2002, and it hosts post-Second World War stained glass windows by Staffpeil. Staffpeil was born in 1923 and passed away in 2007, and was active in a very long period. He realized the stained glass windows in two distant phases. The first phases he realized in the 1960s, and the second around the 1990s. So also an example illustrating that far into the 20th century, the idea was cherished that the church building needed to be finished with stained glass windows. 6 years ago, so in 2017, official steps were taken to find a new function for the church. There is still no decision which could be the best reuse program for the out-of-use monumental parish church. But in my opinion, it is not surprising, and let me explain why. The windows are well executed, let's say best case examples, the result of a meticulous search for the right architectural glass, which offers the church interior the right atmosphere through colored light, specifically designed for the worship and expressing the traditional information by means of Bible figures, and in the later series also by symbols from the nature. Now, the question is how to find a new identity for this architecture through its memory, focusing on the generous quality of the space, including the stained glass windows, which were so essential for its former core mission. In this case, as it concerns a listed church, the windows have to be integrated in the reuse concept. The church architecture and interior are characteristic for the era. The project expresses the notion of the triumphant church, determinant in all phases of life, and in doing so, it expresses the church's authoritarian and hierarchical organization and agency. So the question is it possible to distance this built heritage from its negative connotation, which instigated the church's decline? Particularly in this case, the emphatic presence and symbolism of the stained glass windows is an inescapable reminder of the original function and all its connotations. As a consequence, working with the existing characteristics of the interior, it is a hard commission to suggest a new concept that conserves the artifact while dissociating it from the negative side tones. Going over to another town in the same province, I would like to show you interiors from a private institution, the Psychiatric Institute St. John in Eeklo. The Psychiatric Institute has different buildings with windows in different techniques, and not all the windows are in religious spaces. So we will see a mix of stained glass and also glass in concrete examples. Staff Peil is again the artist who realized all the windows. Staff Peil was a spiritual person and succeeded in creating a fitting atmosphere and at the same time to establish a high dose of texture and tactility, which invites the user to come closer, to investigate, to discover, and even to touch these windows. And all the windows on the site of the Psychiatric Institute are not listed. So I will start with this example that you see now on the slides. These are glassing concrete walls in a residential care home, so one of the buildings on the site. And in the overall atmosphere, these walls too are very much an expression of their time, the 1960s, and would elsewhere have long been replaced as outdated, as would have been the architecture itself, as it is customary in the care sector, replace old buildings which embody outdated care vision. The walls are part of the building's physical interior as well as its interiority, and also, one could say, constitutes to the building's inner nature, its essence. This being recognized and even cherished by the directors and administrative staff of the Institute, helped the glassing concrete walls survive. As the institution, as many of the kind in Flanders, was founded by and it still has connections with the religious order, the relationship with the church is mediated. The domain also accommodates a pure modernist building, which was built originally as a mortuary, and it dates back to the 1960s again. It was finished in 1967. This mortuary has been empty for a while now, and the Institute's attachment to the work of Staff Peil, an empathetic attitude, let's say, a good understanding with the city council and its administration, but also, and let's not forget this, the healthy finances of the Psychiatric Institute gives rooms for decisions beyond sheer rationalism. In general, but especially in the context of issues around mental health, patients and care providers occasionally need a place of silence. It has recently been decided to reopen and redesign the mortuary in this sense as a space with a healing atmosphere, largely due to the work of Staff Peil. The reconversion is in the planning phase. So in both examples, the care home as well as the mortuary, the existing is considered as a reservoir for new concepts. The good and accepting decision is obviously the result of a complex and sophisticated relationship with the host space. A satisfying solution has here been obtained by addressing the building's intangible qualities through its material presence and by an understanding of the relevance of the whole, considering it as an integrated entity, which includes the windows. So from my last example, we move to the outskirts of the same town, Eeklo, to the Church of Our Lady of Assumption. This is a post-war parish church constructed again in the mid-1960s. The church was already over-dimensioned at the moment of completion, boasting a nave of 1,018 quarter meters and the winter chapel of almost 160 quarter meters. More surprisingly, almost 40 years later, so in 2001, new stained glass windows were commissioned from Staff Peil for the nave. He had realized the stained glass windows for the winter chapel immediately after construction. So the new windows were for the nave. In 2020, so less than 20 years after the last windows, the Church Council started to search for a new function. A feasibility study was commissioned, and the last celebration of the Eucharist took place on 15 August, just 1 week ago, exactly 1 week ago. In the feasibility study, the following functions with a community aspect are considered: a sports hotel with 16 beds, a theater hall and cafe, a ballet room or an event hall, or accompanied by additional open spaces for which the outdoor domain of the church is perfectly suitable. At this moment, it looks like the church building with the presbytery will be taken over by a school. As the building is well suited for compartmenting, a box-in-box solution is a possible approach. Though only preliminary talks have been held at this point, the school board is already stressing the fact that children will need a sufficient amount of daylight. Who can deny this? The search has been and still is long and difficult. A solution will have to be found for the functioning of the school as well as for the heritage preservation. The community and the city council are both still very much attached to the church, even though attendance has dwindled. Eiler Rasmussen's suggestion from 1959 of an obligation to experience the architecture when looking for a new function is clearly not enough. This could work for the architectural space alone, perhaps, but it disregards stained glass windows and interior furnishings. Both in the nave and the winter chapel, the presence of the stained glass windows is dominant. They influence the incidence of daylight, close of the outside world, and are full of symbols referring to the Catholic Church. In the nave, it is difficult to not see the motif of the cross as the composition's structuring principle. It is also very much present in the winter chapel, where the iconography behind the composition is the celestial Jerusalem, let's say the depiction of a city. Where in artistic terms, the idea of a total concept is expressed in this common motif and in the relation between the two spaces, which are connected visually and conceptually, this given is not advantageous when considering options for reuse. Going back to the experience of the space, I would suggest that in the case of churches with stained glass windows, it would be better to speak of communicating with the interior instead of experiencing the architecture. For by doing so, we force ourselves to also take into consideration the short-term history. This is especially relevant for stained glass windows, as they were desired and commissioned by the church community as client until just a few years ago. It is therefore advisable to be empathetic to this relationship, even if it doesn't simplify the task of repurposing. Because how to realize a physical alteration of an inward-looking space to a function which usually demands the opposite? Is it justified to deny the involvement of the community and remove the stained glass windows that are only 30-odd years old? Here, as in many cases, the church community paid for the parish church through weekly collects. Thus, in the winter chapel, every lancet window was financed by a family or organization, one of them the sister of the psychiatric institution I just showed you. Their names appear in the lower zone in plain view. And in a worst-case scenario, when the stained glass windows cannot be maintained on-site, this church is, for example, not listed, only indicated as valuable, how to design the alteration, where to place these artifacts in custody, how to archive the experience of the church interior. What does this mean for the layers and traces of history whose absence is always felt? So all steps require a fundamental understanding of the original, including the understanding what it means for the community to lose this part of its culture. How to look through the eyes of the designer at these tangible and intangible aspects as a source of inspiration for adaptation concepts. Although church windows pose clear challenges to many forms of reuse, it is the fact that the design and value of church architecture is inextricably linked with the contemporaneous applied arts in the interior decoration, which requires us to put into more nuanced perspective the dissociation between the original and the new function. A broad interdisciplinary approach, including archival research, documentation, sociological studies, and oral history, can help to establish a more responsible type of care for these once sacred, now surprisingly fragile places. So, thank you. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Susanna, for give us the opportunity to know about the amazing work of staff Pyle. I think it's okay. I don't know. I must remark the relation you put on the table with the liturgical function and the collective memory of the community. I think it's a really nice work. Please, I think it's Marta. And now you can go ahead.
Yes, thank you, Horacio. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very proud to be here today. I'm very happy to be part of the launch of our next conference in Chile. I'll share my screen. It's okay. Okay. Well, I will talk about a project that I suppose everybody already knows and on which I have worked before, Lina Bobardi's Casa de Vidro. Although the architecture of this building is quite well known, my comments focus on the interior design of its living spaces throughout its more than 60 years of existence and the subsequent protective actions that the heritage agencies took after the owner's deaths. By observing this example, my idea is that we can cover broader issues. Lina Bobardi designed this house for herself and her husband, Pietro Maria, then a prominent antique dealer and cultural promoter 4 years after they arrived in Brazil. He was not an ordinary husband in the sense of someone involved in the arts and cultural world, very well connected and informed. So he must have actively participated in the elaboration of the design made by her. The building is in the Murumbi neighborhood, 15 kilometers from São Paulo downtown, and was completed in 1951. Then almost uninhabited, the site was considered a rural area until the 1940s, when the urbanization process of the capital of São Paulo extended in that direction, supported by the growth of the road network and the spread of car use. Despite the similarities in terms of landscape, the proposal differed from the Garden City model, as it was an exclusively residential extension of a pre-existent city on which it depended. The house was born naked in a way and hybrid since the beginning. It was a suspended glass box containing the social areas where modern furniture is tended alongside sophisticated antique pieces. At the same time, the bedroom's wings were built in masonry around a patio solidly set on the ground. The same kind of unusual composition appears in the internal ambiances. From arrival on the main floor and clockwise, the social area is organized into 4 sets: the library, the living room, the fireplace, and the dining area. The few pieces of furniture were arranged diversely. The bookcases designed by the architect are hollowed out and placed away from the walls. In front of them, a row of empire-style chairs provides a touch of contrast. In the living room, which had little loose furniture, about 10 armchairs of 2 different models, both designed by Lina Bardi, there is no unit of furniture style. The set was composed of different groups, those pieces designed by the architect, high-value antiques, and many works of art from different times. Over time, a gradual process of accumulation led to another arrangement. The original Baroque statues and Renaissance cassoni began to live side by side with colonial artifacts, Art Nouveau vases, contemporary design furniture, and even ordinary objects. Bobardi moved through modern, classic, ordinary, sophisticated, and naive references, proposing the coexistence between the logical rules and the spontaneity she saw as authentic Brazilian, according to herself. Born of a tolerance for mixtures, the interior design of the house over time became somehow permissive. The building surroundings have also changed over time. Soon after the work was completed, Bobardi built a new garage, replacing the previous metal porch. The new one was made of masonry covered with a raw layer of mortar, rocks, and ceramic shards. These walls have small holes where some vegetation grows attached to the rocks. She was trying to restore the native forest in a way. Years later, in 1986, she built the Casinha, Little House, with André Weiner and Marcelo Ferraz at the southeastern end of the lot, where she installed her office. The building is made of a freestanding wooden structure with wooden fences and a ceramic tile roof. These changes inside and out indicate that Lina Bobardi was walking a more complex path than the so-called pure modernity. In 1990, the Bardi couple created the Instituto Bardi, housed in Casa de Vidro. When Lina Bobardi died, her widower donated the house to the institution. Although it's listed as heritage by state and then by the city, much of its content was taken by Pietro Maria's descendants after his death. Today, the existing house listed as National Heritage by IFAM in 2009 is the third version of the original project, no longer a house, but a cultural center. In 2016, Casa de Vidro received financial assistance from the Getty Foundation through the Keep It Modern initiative. The funds are used to carry out management and preventive maintenance plan focused on the reinforced concrete structure. And that's it. Lina Bobardi created a whole made of an external shell and its interiors. At the same time, she understands design as an open system, susceptible to changes and affected by the action of time. Throughout the life of the Bardi couple, the residence's ambience had become something else, filled by them with furniture and objects. The exterior landscape has also changed over the years, not only around the property, but also in the house's gardens. However, despite the architect having designed everything from the landscape to the interior arrangements, the heritage protection measures focus only on the building shell. There was the decisive action of the years for this to have happened, taking away many valuable objects. But maybe there are other justifications. One of them is the fact that in Brazil, at least, there is a prejudice and a still hierarchical hegemonic view, placing architecture in a position far superior to interiors. So protecting buildings is considered relevant, unlike its interiors, even if designed by the same team or person. However, there are some things that are essential to interiors, especially of houses. Domestic interiors contain several variables that intervene in specific ways, whether at the time of conception or throughout their life. The first of these is greater susceptibility to the intervention of the client, who often assumes the role of designer. His, her house, his, her kingdom. The other is time, which is responsible for the many natural changes and transformations of life, working to support the transitoriness of the domestic interior in attempting to keep up with and adapt to those changes. Lastly, the private nature of use allows changes in the design to remain hidden from witnesses who might be able to report or even intervene in such processes. Then, as many examples that can attest, interior design is relatively easier to transform, whether through addition, alteration, or removal, even if based on a general plan. The shell of the building is different. It remains constant, like a regular stable container with changing content, or at least more constant. As fundamental as recognizing interior design as part of the modern project is to consider that it is essentially an open system, more susceptible to changes and more affected by the action of time. In fact, change is its essential feature. So the content that characterized Casa de Vidro as the Bardi's residence has no longer existed there. A few years ago, when Lina Bobardi's work has become better understood in its complexity, the residence's interior received greater attention as a study case. Ironically, it happened when the house had already become the now called Instituto Bardi, its third version. The institution that the former residents founded aimed to develop cultural activities and studies related to the history of art and architecture. After their death, it has become responsible for preserving and disseminating their artistic legacy, and where the public has access to Lina Bobardi's work for research and academic activities, in addition to temporary exhibitions and events offered to the community. In this case, there was the preservation of the box that housed Casa de Vidro in the past, which is different from preserving the residence designed by her, the place where she and Pietro Maria lived. On the other hand, this is what was possible under their circumstances, and this is very important, this was the Bardis and the author wanted. Therefore, at least, the envelope of Casa de Vidro still exists and has been maintained mainly by Instituto Bardi's actions and efforts. But if it were possible, which version should be preserved as heritage? There are some modern houses turned into museums of their own. However, works like the restoration of the Tugendhat house cost millions. Even in wealthier countries, some organizations responsible for these works experienced much difficulty. In addition, but not least, in this case, the owners lived in the house for a relatively short time, maybe enough time to modify it. Like museums, these restored houses become visible. Guided tours are charged and are very expensive. Nevertheless, the more well-known the architect and well-maintained the house is, the more expensive the visit is. Some of these houses survive as location sets, intact like a scenery. something Lina Bobardi would probably hate. Others are still private and lucky to be bought by people with a lot of money and concerned about maintaining at least the original atmosphere, like the Frank Lloyd Wright Connolly House. In some cases, the original atmosphere could be complemented by very expensive pieces sold at specialized auctions. Some of them are bought by architects with money, like this Artigas house in São Paulo, something a bit rare. And there are examples that have even more complicated stories, like the McCormick house, which has moved to avoid demolition, is part of a museum of art, architecture, and education in a Chicago suburb. It is a different place and quite changed internally. What remains in this case, like in Casa de Vidro, is the envelope where you can find the photos and drawings of the original house. But that may be the key, or maybe a key. Rather than preserving the house's interiors, having and exhibiting its history is crucial. Sometimes the possible solution could be preserving the registers of the project and building instead of the object itself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Marta. I'm giving the voice to Anita now. Thank you, Anita. Go ahead. Anita, your micro.
There I go. Again. Everything okay? This is the story of 3 interiors, 2 department stores and a private house. They cannot be understood without the common subject of the creative fashion of mind of its owner. Professor John Potvin stated in his book, "We have been led to believe that space in both depth and longevity often prescribed through the thickness of architecture, in contrast to fashion which privileges surface and newness. But sites can be marked as places and spaces which define are untransformed by and because of subjects and objects of fashion. This is the case of the Flaño house, long related and intertwined by fashion and modern architecture." To begin this relation, we must go back to one of the most important department stores in downtown Santiago, at the beginning of the 20th century, Gath & Chavez. As part of the Buenos Aires store expansion, originally founded by Lorenzo Chavez and Alfredo Gath, it opened in Santiago in September in 1910 in Huérfanos and Estado streets. Immediately became one of the most elegant department stores to buy the latest Parisian and London fashion, displacing others like Modas Bourgalat and La Casa Francesa. The building, designed by Siegel and Geiger in concrete and iron, consisted of 5 stories, a marquee and a cupola, with plenty of windows at street level, transforming the street as a place of spectacle and display. Although its success, the store closed its doors and was demolished in 1952. Right across Gath & Chavez happened to be located a small but prolific fashion store named Casa Flaño. Inaugurated in 1937 by Nicolás, Álvaro, and Julián Flaño, the small store was designed by the office of Chilean architect Hernán Labarca and Gonzalo Domínguez. The store was located in the first floor of an old building structure, and the project remodeled and gave a new layout to the original place. The store was described in magazines as elegant and very modern, in addition to being arranged according to all the rules of good taste. The store stood out for its minimal decoration, made almost entirely of hardwoods that were part of the architecture, included accentuated horizontal lines and shelves, and a delicate but modern lighting system that organized the circulation. The metallic staircase stood out in the conformation of the speciality, and, following the logic of the Celtic shopping galleries in Santiago, visually linked the different areas and level of the store. The linear distribution of the store allowed the vertical arrangement of showcases and permitted a large product display area. The shelving built into the perimeter walls generated a large central space suitable for maximum product exhibition. The interior design operated as a large box containing the elements to be exhibited in the cleanest and clearest possible way. In terms of functionality, the virtual separation of different areas by means of furniture allowed the interior of the store to be a transitory and variable support that could be transformed for the frequent rotation of products according to the trends or needs of the moment. Interior flexibility was gained with the minimum rigid operation. The logic of this department store will be translated into a future Flaño house. When Gaff and Chavez began to be demolished across the street, Álvaro Flaño, while working in his own store, decided to buy the 6-meter steel I-beams for the demolition. This opportunity appeared as a forced design for the future commission of his own house, which was made to the architect Hernán Labarca, the same architect who had designed the previous store. Flaño insisted in using them in the future house they were planning in Vitacura. The orthogonal geometric simplicity and the use of steel frames, the open plan, the effective functional circulation, as well as the flexibility that the store possessed, were transferred into a residential program. So not only the logic of the flexible interior and the display of the department store was translated to a residential project, but directly Gaff and Chavez building material was used in the design of the house, defining the structure and the tectonic of the house. The house was built in 1954 and located in the residential neighborhood of Vitacura in Santiago. With 2 open floors, a small basement, and transparent perimeters of glass windows, the house raised over a middle-height stone wall, managing the relation between interiors and exteriors. The wall also divided and confined an indoor garden and protected the views between the house and the exterior. Mimicking the organization of retail stores, the house arranged circulation within a long corridor along a thick stone wall that sharply divided the house into public spaces, public rooms, and services. The furniture, in a classic manner, was arranged through the borders of the space, articulating different settings and rooms. The house was a container of different, freely arranged furniture conforming interiors between a mixture of modern objects and old inherited antiques. As Álvaro Flaño reflected in an interview, he tried to balance serial production with unique, bespoke, or handcrafted objects. The house was a setting, a display of a performative element and situation, including his own clothing design and personal activities, as we can see in these pictures of his daughter's wedding. The house and its layout allowed for Flaño to use it as one of the first locations for private fashion shows in Chile, using the public spaces such as living room and hallways as temporary runways. Conjoining the performative and the spectacle in the word's definition, a temporary reality, but also defining the difference between place as a temporary reality versus a space as an abstract but concrete whilst fluid location. Furniture was not fixed, nor corresponded to the original layout design in the architectural plans by Labarca. Rather, they were interchanged between the house and his other project, our last case study, La Maison Flaño. The last step in this intricate relationship between character, architecture, and fashion is set in another store, La Maison Flanio, Álvaro Flaño's latest project. This department store opened in 1968 inside a box art building in downtown Santiago. This department store was located right across the Teatro Municipal, the most important classic theater in Santiago. During the 60s, it was a bustling place to meet, look at the latest trends in clothing, furniture, books, and jewelry, as well as a place to get tailored garments or handcrafted furniture. Music venues and concerts also took place inside the Maison. This store was also a significant place for prominent designers to show and sell their designs. To understand its impact, furniture designer Sergio Mata made a special collaboration with La Maison, and Luciano Brancoli, a famous Chilean tailor and designer, had his first design sold in there. It also had a bustling tea house inside a winter garden where fashion shows took place. The arrangement of window displays and garments, although the scale and proportion of the historic building had a domestic character, made all pieces reachable by hand. This is what could be defined as the haptic gaze. But instead of using mannequins, as was usual among the emerging 20th century boutiques or ateliers, the modern represented in the store layout is now recognizable for being accessible, touchable, and experienced. Thus, the performance of the shopper and buyer inside the store organized the continuous arrangement of objects and architectural backdrops in a visual, haptic, and experience relationship with the store. Some similar objects can be seen placed in the Flanio house as well as in the Maison Flanio. Furniture such as artisan chairs and colonial ironwork pieces intentionally mingled with modern artifacts or design, curated by the hand of Álvaro Flanio and his business partner, architect Melvin Villarroel. The dissonance between the outer shell or building and the flexible, yet in this case eclectic interior, is also repeated throughout both cases. Both fashion and space possess and are possessed by a body. The body is an agent of transformation, or as Merleau-Ponty states, the body is the way into the world and the object. These three cases reconstruct the way one man organized the world and the modern interior as an experience, or as Entwistle states, a way of making sense into the world, locating the place. Reading his subjects and their assembly in pictures reconstruct his place in the world. The connection between language, material, object display, life, and experience embody the modern experience of life and lifestyle of Mr. Flanio, as an opposite to the closed, cryptic spaces of gentleman club secrecy. But these interiors represent modern as an experience connecting tradition, open spaces, fashion, and consumerism. Although none of the three interiors remain, only the buildings that contain both stored, images reveal the backstage of a life, and objects such as furniture or clothes persist disseminated in his family houses or customers' closet, as a testimony of a time, a lifestyle, and a collective memory of a fashionable time and social space in Chile, curated by the hand of Mr. Flanio and the architecture of his three houses. Methodologically, this work required to reconstruct spaces throughout architectural plans, magazines, and family pictures, all disseminated between owner, architect archives, and family possessions, reflecting the methodological use with interior. But this allowed now to not only understand the house as an isolated object, but to involve in the narrative the history of this man and his relationship with commerce and fashion, and how this allows to interpret the house, giving it a wider understanding to modern living, to reconstruct the house and all of them as a whole, the project, the object, the owner, and his memory. Thank you.
Thank you, Anita. I want to remark from the presentation of Marta, the idea of the interior as an open system and contrast in this case with the Flanio house. I think it's the same idea, but it's also the same idea related with the objects in the space. Well, I don't know if someone has questions, comments. Yes. Your microphone. Yes, go ahead.
To Marta about Bovardi House. You mentioned something about at the end of the presentation about preserving the history of these spaces and their material culture, meaning doing what kind of things to preserve that history. It's what what do you think are the best ways maybe to preserve that?
Well, thank you for your question. I think that, for example, the work that the Istituto Bardi does is a very important work. They have a lot of drawings, photographs, is a huge archive in a way of the house, and more than the house, of Lina Bobardi's work. So I think that is very important to maintain a house, but sometimes this is impossible. And as I said, and as I see interiors and mainly a house as something that changes, it's really an open system, in my opinion. I think that the house changes, so it's almost impossible to freeze a certain point or a certain version of the house in the most of the cases. So I think that the possibility to have these photos, images, drawings is the best way. For example, I think that all the architects and researchers who looks for interiors and works with interiors, we have to deal basically with photographs or paintings or this kind of information, because the real interior, or the interior that people used to have actually in that place or mainly in that house, is almost impossible to find alive, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Marta. Thank you, Vicente. Anatos Toes. Thank you for being with us.
Oh, it's a great pleasure, and I wish to greet this organization, Susanna, Marta, and Anita. Oh, and very briefly, I would like to comment concerning Susanna's Borosk presentation, at what extent this kind of minor arts can become major arts. And I believe our ISC committee is very committed with this. Concerning the presentation of Anita, I would like to understand deeper how she thinks it's possible to keep this kind of Gesamtkunstwerk, as far as I understood. And concerning Marta Peixoto and always amazing Casa de Vidro, it's incredible how we are always moved, and we can say always new things on this really open work from Lina. At what extent do you think, and it's something that we normally talk, this hybrid approach is in fact a kind of a modern or a concept of modernity. And I would say that this is something that occurs in several cases in the Brazil modern. I'm thinking about the little house of Lúcio Costa in Leblon. I'm not, I hope I'm not, it's Leblon, no. You know, with all these mixed things as well. So in a way, and for instance, the Niemeyer's house in Cataguases, I think this is really a huge topic to address, how this commitment with modernity is full of these, I would say, quite vernacular and poof, a kind of environmental objects in a way. Perhaps it's a long question, but if you could just, let's say, comment a little bit, I will be very happy. And thank you very much. I enjoy a lot. Oh, and Horacio, of course, our chair of the conference in Chile. Arigato.
Thank you, Anna. Okay, is wanna do some comment? Anita, Marta, or Susana? No? Okay.
Yes, Marta, please, Marta, please, yes.
Okay. Okay. Well, Anna, thank you. I am really very focused in this subject, this kind of eclectic, in a way, way of doing things, in a way, the way of doing eclectic interiors. But I think that trying to be very short in a topic that deserves hundreds of hours of discussion. I think that especially inside the modern architecture didn't broke with a kind of tradition, in my opinion, or in different degrees, even more hardcore architects like Mies, for example, I think that almost always have a kind of a touch of difference, or a rug, or a sculpture, a figurative sculpture in a very abstract atmosphere. So in a way, and in different doses, because in the case of Lina, I think that in the end of her life, this doses was almost a kind of excessive in a way, but I think that it always happens in different degrees and in different ways, and of course in different cultures and even way of doing architecture. But I think that this, and mostly in houses, in residences, when I think that architects know, that is something more soft in a way. I don't know if I answered your question, but I tried.
Yes, thank you. We will talk later.
I can continue with Anna's questions about, I don't think if I have one answer to how you must do it, because this is such a particular case. But what I'm reflecting within this case is what things input and give you input to value some object of architecture in a broader sense that involves transdisciplinary proceedings. I mean, this case specifically had a lot about material culture because it has to do with clothing and what he made. And also reflecting on what Martha said, sometimes the interior designs, specifically in this case or in the stores we saw, do not reflect the modern design, but rather they reflect a modern concept of a lifestyle. You see, he had like inherited pieces. He did not have all of his furniture like modern design, but he really had a modern lifestyle and a modern way of thinking how he wanted to live his life. And so what I'm arguing is that you cannot only understand the house by itself as an object, but you have to understand it as a whole with the stores and with the story of this man and what he did to the city and to the social life in Santiago specifically. So you have to understand the object, you have to understand the picture, but you have to include the history of the life of this person to understand the house as a whole and what the house actually means. So it was more about reflecting about the methodology of how to understand interior design, specifically, what Marta also did. I don't know if you have that answer something.
Yes, of course. Yes.
May I continue, because this is actually exactly the same in a completely different setting that I was trying to talk about, and what Anna said, the stained glass window is a minor art, but it is just a classification because it's not a free art. So it is called minor because it belongs, because it is applied art, but it has nothing to do actually with the value of these things, and especially because it is applied art, it is connected to the architecture, and when it is well done, when it is a good stained glass window, then it is albeit designed after, often after the completion of the architecture, is 100% related to the architecture. So we talk about minor art, but it is, of course, has nothing to do with the meaning of these creations. And so it is it is not always the case, but the examples that I showed you are the connection with the architectural shell and the interior is just 100%. You take that out and you lose everything, because actually in the last example, the 60s church building, is from the architectural point of view is not interesting. It's not a good architecture. The size is too big. So it was actually a very mediocre creation. But because of the stained glass windows, it became something, and it has been working well. So but this you can only understand when, as going back to what Anita just said, is that when you take into consideration all the aspects, also the social aspect, the oral history. So these people lose now their parish church, and they are very sad, really. But they don't want to go to the church because they have a problem with the church as an institution, but they like that church building. So these are they're very different things. But at the end, as we are working on architecture and interiors and the value of this is a very crucial part of their existence. So let's say just demolish it, then you lose something which is very important for the community. So that's perhaps what I wanted to add, and is the link. There were completely different examples. That's also the link with Anita's work, and also actually what Marta showed us is that you have to go with the time and to let changes happen, but not without knowledge and not without taking into consideration all aspects that is related to the building.
Thank you, Susanna. I want to ask you about the conditions of technical conditions of this glass inside the concrete, because it's also the same material for the facade and for the interior. It's interesting, and the way of became obsolete or crack the building, the glass. Sorry, how is the condition mostly in several cases?
Well, the glass in concrete is basically with very thick colored glasses, very thick, sometimes 20 centimeter thick, not always, but when it is about such a big thick thick pieces of glass, it is cut with a hammer. So it's it's very different than a stained glass window. And then they put it in a sort of bath, let's say, and it is filled with concrete. So this is just the basic technique. So you have actually a wall of concrete and thick pieces of glass. So for the insulation, it's just nothing. It doesn't do anything practically. It is a little bit better than stained glass, because in a stained glass window, even water can come inside. This is not the case. And especially in West European climates, it poses also insulation problems. But if it is executed well, then they can go on very long. The most problem that you can have, that there are perhaps cracks in the glass, but it doesn't affect actually the wall, so it won't lose its how's it called? It won't lose its stability. So that is not a problem. The problem is the insulation. That is sometimes they put an extra wall, an extra layer of glass. That is actually the only thing that they can do, or they just leave it like that.
Another question, comments? No one? Yes, Marielle, please, go ahead. The microphone. Maybe you can open Humberto as the host.
No, I can ask to
Okay.
To reactivate the.
Okay.
Yes, thank you. I have a question for Susanna, because in the other two projects, it's the community is very important, and the community keeps it alive. Now, I wonder if there are any suggestions by the community which had to leave the building, if they have thoughts themselves about how to keep the building alive.
So as far as I know, so in the psychiatric institution is not a problem. They are very, very much committed. There is also another example I didn't show you, because they even had a stained glass window by Staffbell in a staircase. But because it was in a staircase, so it was just passing by that they could see the window. And they liked the window so much that they took it out and they put the window into the dining room of one of the buildings, so that the patients can eat in the room while seeing the stained glass windows. And it can go quite far, this appreciation. So the site of the Psychiatric Institute is so that these people are very, very committed to this heritage, and they do also a lot of things for that. And so it is very much appreciated. But of course, it's a private institute. So if as long as they take care of it, and as long as they want to pay for it, it's okay. But of course, when you go to a parish church, the parish church has to be financed. And as I said in the beginning, if a monthly church attendance is 1% in a month, and the maintenance has to be paid by tax money, then of course you can't force a community to put so much money in a building which is perhaps appreciated somehow, but not used anymore. So it's a big problem. If there was enough money, then probably all these churches could be maintained financially, and people would be very happy to have a silent space in their village or in their neighborhood. But this is financially not a problem. It have to be kept open, it have to be maintained, and the costs are just too high. So it's a conflict, and at the same time, there is an enormous need for new buildings, for quarter meters. So the conflict in comparison with other needs is even bigger. So in the case of this church in Eeklo, I think that we would be also already happy if in the new function the stained glass windows could remain, because I think that is at this point is the most that you can hope for when the church building is not listed. The maintenance of the stained glass windows is mainly because of the community. And there is also in the community, there is also in the city, there is also an organization with people who in their free time are lobbying for keeping historical buildings for the churches, not only modernist churches. So it's a place which is quite alive in this respect, and this is not always the case. So it's a conflict that has to be solved, and there are, I think, it is possible to find a good solution and to keep a building alive, because that is important. That a building has to be used in one way or another, and these are just examples, but there are hundreds of such examples from Flanders which are questioning their future. Only parish churches, and I don't talk now about other buildings. I don't know if it is an answer.
Probably, I'm sorry that I can add probably something because I'm an art historian, but I live in Eeklo, so I know the situation a little bit. Yeah, the church was too big for the community. They looked for there was first ideas for a concert hall, a theater hall, as a box in a box, and now the school, the director of the school is somebody from the neighborhood there. She knows, you still hear me? Yeah. She knows the situation in the community very well. She was in the choir and so on. And she said, yeah, I will respect the building. I hope what she said will be in the future. The only thing they said, yeah, they will build, it's a French school. It's alternative education. It's not a classical school, but they need space. They need classrooms, of course. They need more light. She said, we need light. So, but in Eeklo, yeah, we hope that it's a total, it's a Gesamtkunstwerk. You can't, and it's the window from 2001 is the last work, Stafpeil made, and the combination is, yeah, you can't replace the windows. I think. So I don't know, but also the school, the people from the school, they said, yeah, we will give our school in the evening to the community, so as a meeting place. The church will be used as a concert hall, for instance, or for big meetings, and that's what they said. So I hope that their ideas and that it will be a good example of a reuse of a church with the windows, of course. I hope so.
Thank you, Philip. Anyone else? Oh, I must thank Susanna Borox, Anita Puig, and Marta Peixoto, because this first pre-event of our 18 International Docomomo Conference to be held in December 2024 in Santiago, in Chile. I give you my thank you for being with us. Thank you for start with this challenge of having these pre-events. I can say that we are going to have another pre-event next Tuesday, and every Tuesday in this second part of the year. In the next one will be Humberto Bonomo and Rodrigo Gertosio with some with the reflections about the housing complexes in Chile.
Horacio, can we show the video again, please?
Yes, please.
For the
I encourage to all of you to present a session. We have some technical issues with the system, but I think it will be okay at the end of the week. Thank you, Humberto. So thank you so much. See you next Tuesday.
See you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank you,
Anita,
everyone.
Susana,
Thank
Marta. Thank you for all of us.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.